You're back. Welcome to another episode of And Then We Win. It is I, Dr. Justin Singleton, here in the place to be. And I'm getting kind of sad and kind of happy at the same exact time because we are coming down to our next to last episode of And Then We Win. And so it's kind of a bittersweet moment. Like, I had no idea this journey was going to be where it is today, but we'll worry about that on the next episode. But I'm so happy that you're here. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you share this episode with your friends, colleagues, grandma, auntie, uncles, everybody that has somebody that's playing sports. And this week we have a colleague of mine, Kelli. She's actually the athletic counselor for Indiana University, and she did obtain her master's from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and so did I. So we got that VFL connection going on. Love it when I can find a connection between me and my guest, but I'm so happy to have her coming up on this episode. And I think I mentioned she's with Indiana University, and they won a championship this past year and the college football playoffs. And so it was great that she was able to finally sit down, take some time to have a very important conversation with me on this podcast. And so I won't talk long. I want to, but I'm going to save it all for the next episode. And then we'll probably have a bonus episode coming after the last episode, depending on how things work. But the next episode will be the last one for season 1. And then we'll look back at coming back in the fall. So please make sure that you are following and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts so you can be in the know of all the happenings that's going on. And so without further ado, here goes Kelli and myself for this next episode of And Then We Win. All right, and we're back on another episode of And Then We Win. I'm Dr. Justin Singleton, the host of this show, and also the co-founder of Just Single Vision Consultant. I am lucky to have somebody we actually got on the show. We had a couple bumps and bruises getting through here, but we finally made it here. And I always love to find a degree of separation with most of my guests. And fortunately, we're both balls at heart. We got our masters from University of Tennessee College of Social Work, based out of Knoxville, Tennessee. I am lucky to have Kelli Monedero. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you for being here. And is there anything you want to say before I start diving into some questions? Because I'm ready to go.
No, I really appreciate the chance. So thanks for asking, Dr. J, and go Vols.
And there we go, VFL for life. And so you have a very important position and role at Indiana University. And most importantly, you are athletic counselor at the school, a Power 5 school at that. And so you're one of my first individual from Power 5 school to actually be on the show. So I'm excited about that in general, but you are also a licensed clinical social worker, and you have your CMPC, which is most people don't know. Well, some people do know in the field. You're a certified mental performance coach. And so having that role at this school, how is it, or do you find challenges with trying to separate your role as a social worker and a mental performance consultant?
That's a great first question. So I think the thing that's a gift and a curse is having both of those things. So lots of people that do clinical work say, oh, I think it'd be hard to do the performance work. And some people that do performance work say it could be difficult to do the performance work without overlapping the clinical work. I think it's actually a really big gift. And the thing that I think about a lot is if I'm in a session with a student and I'm doing mental performance stuff and we start to, get a little bit of gray area, whereas, oh, that's kind of getting into the clinical piece. And I think it'd be so hard to be like, hold on, stop, pause. We've reached our capacity or limit. And it wouldn't go exactly like that. I'm been a social worker for almost 20 years, but I just think a lot about how in the world of athletics, it's really difficult to parse it all out and say it's only performance or it's only clinical issues or concerns. And so being dually trained is, from my perspective, a very, very valuable asset in the college athletics scene because it allows me to toggle back and forth between some weeks are really heavy clinical weeks because students are really stressed about finals and things are going on at home or in relationships. And then some weeks I spend working solely on performance because it's championship week and we've got to get really prepared to compete at a high level. And I think that having that leveraged relationship on both sides can be really valuable when providing care for student athletes.
So you got some time doing this work. How do you know? I know you say you just don't cut it off in the middle, like, oh, this is clinical work. Let me stop and do clinical. How do you know it's that moment when to go into one area and not in the other, or even toggle back and forth? Because I'm pretty sure you have some situations where you had to go back and forth maybe 2 or 3 times in the session. So how do you do that?
Man, I don't know. It's really interesting. So I have been a social worker since 2007, and I've been a track and field coach since 2000 and was a track and field coach till 2020. And I think that that has really flavored my social work approach, and it's kind of what got me interested in sports social work. And so I always use the analogy that I think it's really hard to, once you have a bowl of spaghetti together, it's really hard to take it apart again. And so when you think
Mm-hmm.
about like pulling the noodle out of the spaghetti and you're like trying to get the sauce off, that's the analogy that I think of when I think of, how do I know when it's social work versus when it's CMPC stuff? I think there is a very clear clinical distinction if we're having generalized anxiety or significant depressive
Mm-hmm.
symptoms. But I also think that and as I was studying for my CMPC, which to the credit of the world, like I am a very newly minted CMPC, like I'm a 1 year in, just still doing
Mm-hmm.
this. But I think that they flavor each other so much. And when I was studying for the CMPC exam and doing the supervision and the training, I was like, oh, so many of my clinical skills are so relevant in this work as a CMPC. And so I think it's one of those things. I think it's about knowing your students really well, your patients, your clients, whatever language
Mm-hmm.
we want to use. I also think it's knowing where our strengths are. So I feel most comfortable right now probably doing heavier clinical work because that's what I've been doing for 17, 18, 19 years. And so what I have to do is lean into the CMPC, lean into the sport performance more. So I think part of it is also knowing yourself really well as a practitioner about where, so I'm maybe more comfortable clinically, so maybe I might lean that way versus
Mm-hmm.
like someone who has been a CMPC for 10 years and newly is a newly minted LCSW, they might potentially lean more sport performance heavy. And so some of that is about knowing yourself really well as a practitioner, having a really great relationship with your athletes, and then being able to figure out what is the best sort of prescription in that moment. Does that answer your question, Dr. J? I feel like I kind of went
Oh
every.
yeah, no, that's look, because I'm going in the same direction too. I'm trying to work on getting my CNPC too and my LCSW. So I'm taking this stuff as I'm asking as well. So
Okay.
that's very helpful. And so you said you've been in the social work game for a while, probably about 20 years or so. And it probably went by very fast. How was that journey prepared you to where you are right now? Going from, because I saw you as a school social worker, we're twinsies in that space too.
Yeah.
We both coach and all that. And so just thinking about, when did you say, hey, I want to go to sports social work now? Because you got a pretty extensive background in social work.
Yeah. So I knew that I wanted to help people, but I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do in that realm. And so when I was in grad school, I was also coaching track and field at Knoxville West High School. And we
Okay.
won 2 state titles when I was there. So we'll just go ahead and shout that out because we had some really strong athletes and great coaches. But when I was coaching, what I realized is that the social work interventions I was learning about were really valuable in the athletic space. And so I started integrating just more like strength based models and just more positive reinforcement, just more like holistic looking at, so we have a student athlete and that's sort of one dimensional the way that we see someone. And so there's all these other things, right? Systems are a really big thing for us as social workers. And so thinking about all the systems that were impacting my student athletes at that time, so that sort of started it. And then when I got to Indianapolis, so after I lived in Knoxville, I worked at an outdoor wilderness camp for about a year. And then I got to Indianapolis and I started coaching again and working and was a school social worker. And I just really started integrating social work practices into my track and field practices. And it was really fun for me. And the kids were great. But because I had great relationships with them, I'd be like, all right, guys, we're gonna try this like thing today. And they'd be like, Coach K, what you want us to do? Like, what? And I was like, just like hang with me for a second. Let's just try it. And so we did all kinds of really neat things that build healthy relationships, that have positive communication, that create a healthy feedback loop from a coaching standpoint so that the students can give feedback to coaches. We created a really fun, like we did John Wooden's Pyramid of Success one year, and each week was a different like descriptor word about what success takes. And
Hmm.
then we like looked for that in the classroom, in academics, on the track. So all kinds of things that I would normally do in a social work setting or like in an individual session or in a group session. I sort of took those strategies and just started utilizing them with my track and field kids. And they like jumped on board, which I'm very, very thankful for that. And it just was sort of like these things go like, I don't know, peas and carrots, peanut butter and jelly, however the saying
Yeah.
goes. They go really well together and they complement each other really well. And I also think, we talked a lot about in the Alliance of Social Workers in Sports, we really believe that athletes are a vulnerable population. And I
Mm-hmm.
just think that goes against a lot of what people believe about athletes or their experience or their vision or version of athletes. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was something too that felt really powerful to really, and it really resonated with me doing social work things with athletes as a vulnerable population before I was technically a sport social worker, I suppose.
Wow, so you've been there, done that, got a T-shirt, and have actually seen a lot of great results from that. And I think it is, from what I'm hearing, is that you're saying all teams need to have some type of social work component in there. If they want to win, they want to be champions. They want to be like you and create champions. That is where we're talking about making sure that the whole athlete's taken care of, because a lot of the stuff that they can bring on the field will have an impact on how they perform. And even if it's just like the smallest social anxiety thing that they're dealing with, that can bleed into some of their performance. And so sometimes we tend to forget about that. But however, you found a way to make sure all that existed, but you created relationships. And so that relationship is very important. And did you just highly recommend that before we even introduce some of these concepts of what sports social work can do, that relationship building is probably more the critical point we need to address?
Yeah, because I think that there are certain points where you can, kind of sneakily insert social work things, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that comes as a result of the relationship. And so if I have a relationship with an athlete or with a coach or with a trainer, and I'm just casually taking a stroll with them, as a sneaky social worker, I'm able to, get some ideas in. I'm able to make some suggestions. I'm able to make some observations, but none of that is credible if I don't have a good already existing relationship with that person. And so
Mm-hmm.
I personally think, as with anything, relationship is going to be the foundation. And that's where then the magic happens after that. Because in order for you to listen to me or to find me credible or to think like, well, she might know what she's talking about, you have to know me a little bit. I have to have a kind of a pre existing relationship. And I don't want to say that that's always the case, because I think I've done great work with kids who have come into my office the day of and said, hey, I've got this performance thing that's going on. And we've been able to sort of like nip things pretty quickly. But I think that over the long term and like with substantial, this is maybe more with group work too, but I'm thinking over time, the more relationships that you build, the more credible you become, the more you're asked for feedback, the more they wrap you into the system, the more. So it's, one thing begets the next thing begets the next as you build.
Yeah, that's one thing, especially when you're working at that early age of youth, is that, they are your biggest promoters. They'll promote you even better than Instagram and Twitter can ever do in your life. So, and building that relationship and getting them to vouch for you is always is critical there. But authentic relationships do matter, and so we can't do our work unless that exists. And so, now that we know that you are, a state champion coach or whatnot, and so you moved into the D1 space, and so that transition for you, did it find it challenging for you to actually, do all this work on the working with the youth and at their developmental stage? And then going from the high school to actually to a college and providing that support. And so were there any changes there? Was there any rough transitions, or was it a smooth transition for you?
So I think the thing that's very interesting to me is that, and this is just my observation and my experience, is that as humans, we like deep connection with other people. We like things that are fun. We like, I mean, if you're a competitive person, you like silly games and fun things. And so what I found actually is that a lot of the things that I did with my middle schoolers and high schoolers, I can still do with college age students and or adults or coaching staff. And
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean that they're immature, and it doesn't mean that they don't, that I'm pulling the wool over their eyes. That doesn't mean that at all. But what it
Mm-hmm.
means is that we can, I think, and especially as social workers, I think we can, like make those adjustments to different spaces and places because we're well trained and we're well versed in lots of different areas. And so there were a couple of adjustments for sure. But the thing that I thought of really consistently was that these freshmen that I have that I get that, get sent to me and I get to hold with my hands, they were my seniors from last year. And so there's not a ton of difference in that, in that quick summertime experience. And I think for me, one of the most fun things has been being able to have students over the course of 4 years when they stay and see them when they're freshmen, they're a little bit more meek and they are still attached to the household from which they came with values and belief systems. And by about the end of their sophomore year, they start to question some of those things. And there's like
Hmm.
a little crack in the system where they start to say, like, I have some different ideas and I'm curious about those and I wonder what this is like. And then by the time they're seniors, they're whole people again. And so that's been a really fun process. I think the thing that's really interesting is that what I find myself and even now I've been doing this work at a Power 4 Division 1 school for 6 years now. There are still situations where I think like, "Oh, I don't know if I know how to do this or I don't know if I know the answer to that." And then when the situation like processes and we talk through it, I'm like, I dealt with that when I was a school social worker as well. I
Hmm.
dealt with that when I was at an outdoor wilderness camp. I dealt with that when I worked in community mental health. And so I think I want to be really clear, and we talk to the kids about this all the time. If you do the work, the skills are transferable. We just have to figure out how they fit in different settings and in different placements. But we have the skills and we are given the skills and we work to develop the skills. And we just have to fine tune them a little bit depending on setting and preference and population.
That's very powerful because I've always said that as a social worker, we don't have all the answers, but what we can do is figure it out.
Yes.
And nothing else we can do. We may not have the answer up front, but we can figure it out, or at least we're about 2 or 3 phone calls away from actually figuring it out. And so that's always powerful because I tell my students all the time, like, you have to work together and we don't always know the answers. But one thing we will do is try to figure it out all together. And so now I can tell my students that what I've been saying is true. We can reassure. And so we talking about, we're at a big one, D1 school, you're at Indiana University. I can imagine, like, we get students from all over the place, and the culture is usually different. It's unique now, especially since you all, won the big natty this past year. So I can imagine what culture is like there. So how did you prepare yourself? Because you saw the shift in the dynamic change from like, okay, yeah, we're a team, we're a decent team, or teams, because in most instances, you start to see when one team was natty, other teams start to get better. Somebody needs to do some research on that, but I'm pretty sure it's there. But teams start to get better around you. So, how was that culture shift like for you? Because I don't know what to ask exactly. I just know it's a culture shift that's there. So, how was that like for you? And how did you find yourself being able to manage and be the social worker that you are in those spaces?
Yeah. So, from a purely logistical standpoint, one of the things that we found really funny was that when I first started at Indiana, you could go and tailgate and park and you could take up like 5 parking spots and it didn't matter because it wasn't always a full lot and the stadium wasn't always full. And now this year and last year too, to some degree, like you could pull in and you were like, there's no parking left.
Yeah.
So that was like just from a purely logistical standpoint of like, oh, people are coming to the games now and you can't take up 5 parking spots and you've got to, back your car in so that you can get out quickly and all those things. So that's something that I think is really funny to think about because before it was just more of like a let's just go hang out, we'll be outside,
Hmm.
have a couple drinks, whatever. But otherwise now it's like, oh no, we gotta be mindful of those things. We gotta like be like, you're sitting in your seats now and you sit in the assigned seat that you have.
Hmm.
So that's been a really fun shift to see that, and so it's also really fun to just think about the fact that we won a national championship. I'm still like, is this real? Like,
Yeah.
am I dreaming? So I think the thing that we thought about a lot was just that when teams do well, when revenue generating sports do well, it inspires other teams to do well. So, you find, and I think there is some statistics, and I don't have the specific place, but like the recruits improve for other teams because they want to come be at a national championship school. The applications increase for the school. So, like, just an
Hmm.
increase in general applications to attend the school is a big deal. And so I think for us, it's about consistency. So we don't need to do much different when we're providing care because if you're doing excellent care already, then there's not much that has to change. I think what we prepared for was the influx of people asking for, hey, do you need more people in your department? Are you hiring? Can we come work for you? It seems like a cool job. And all those things are true. We are not hiring and I don't make those decisions. That's above my pay grade.
Yeah.
But I think for us, it was about continuing to do excellent work, knowing that for us, the outcome goal is the same, which is to provide holistic care for student athletes' mental health, sport performance, and well being. And so I'm a firm believer that if you're doing excellent care and intervention, whether the team is 0-16 or the team is 16-0, that
Hmm.
it just gets exciting and you get to be a part of that excitement. And so it is fun to hear the kids talk about, the night that we won, as soon as the clock hit 0, everyone ran down to Kirkwood Avenue and to see the videos of the bajillions of people. And it was so cold here that weekend. So all that stuff was really fun. But I don't know that there was much that we did different, only because, when you provide excellent work consistently, you don't have to do a lot different.
Oh wow, that's very powerful. I'm saying that a lot. I catch myself saying very powerful a lot in this episode, but that is very important because when you're doing the work, it doesn't matter whether it's a good or bad season. Like you're still providing the most optimal care for those athletes. And so I'm going to fall back a little bit because I was thinking about even with cultural shifts, when we talk about when we have students coming in to just the school in general. I know you say you work with kids where had an opportunity to work with them for 5 years. Maybe they went from the high school to the college area. So how challenging is it to get people on even get student athletes or students on board when they're making that shift from wherever they're from in America to Indiana? Because I know that a lot of people don't have opportunity to visit a big school like that, or when they get there, it's like, well, this is much bigger than I thought. And so I'm making this transition. So how important is for you to help in that transitional piece for them when they're coming from wherever they're coming from?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think that we do really well is, so we have, and I'm assuming many places do this. So I don't think that we're, unique in any way in that regard, but we do what we call PPEs. So they're pre-performance examinations. And so every student that comes into the institution has to have a PPE, and they have like a manila folder. And on the front of it, there's like a list of, vision testing, X-ray, KG. I'm trying to think what else, like nutrition. Sports psych is one of the things on that list.
Hmm.
And so one of the things I think that we do really well is that we just normalize that sports psych is part of your health. Like it's right below your vision. It's right above your EKG. It's right below. And so I think that that's one of the places where we start that sort of, hey, we want
Hmm.
to like point of contact wise, it's really important for you to know that we're here and that we talk about anything and everything related to mental health or sport performance. And so myself, the sports psych, my boss, or our postdoctoral fellow, or any of our practicum students, we sort of all get together on those days and we just like go through. We have a mass PPE day. So there's, sometimes it's like 60 some, 70 some, 80 some. Sometimes certain sports have them on different days. But I think that's one of the ways, that's like one point of contact for us so that we remind them
Hmm.
like, hey, we're there to help with the transition if you need it. And then we also get in front of our students for compliance meetings. So they see our faces again. Hey, we're here to be supportive if you need it. And then we have a really great like sports medicine umbrella and sort of the way that it's structured. So our athletic trainers are really great first lines of intersection for us. And so oftentimes we'll get a connection from an athletic trainer that says, hey, so and so's having a little bit of a hard time adjusting to being here or is a little homesick. I would like to get them connected with you and then we can get connected. So there's a couple of different ways that we can go about that. But part of it too is just making sure that they know what the resources are and they know that if they're feeling a little homesick that we can talk with them, or if they're feeling a little bit like, well, this is a different culture than I'm used to. The thing that's really funny to me, and funny is a word that I use, and I don't know that it's always the appropriate word to use, but
Yeah.
the thing that's funny to me is oftentimes I'll get the freshmen and they might not be performing or competing at the level that they think that they should be. And then when I say things like, have you talked to coach about it? What would coach say if coach was giving feedback? And they're like, oh, coach thinks I'm doing fine. And I'm like, well, so you think that your 18-year-old brain and like better than your coach does. And that's always really funny to me because that is part of that culture shift of like, you're doing exactly what you should be doing as a freshman. And so you're doing great. It sounds like coach would say you're also doing great, but you don't think you're doing great because you are on a team that has all other state champions. So you were a state champion. Everyone else on your team is a state champion. You were a
Hmm.
captain your senior year. Everyone else on your team was a captain their senior year. So it's one of those things too, like when we have the opportunity to normalize some of that, it's a really, again, fun, I don't know if that's the right word, but it's a really great experience to be able to sort of say, hey, you're actually doing much better than you think you are. And you need to listen to your coach that's been coaching for 150 years and not yourself who's, only been doing the sport for like 7 years. So that's,
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question about culture, but it feels like there's a lot of different dynamics at play.
Yeah, I think that's important for athletes even to remember. Like when you once was the big fish in the pond, like okay, you're going to get to an ocean right now. And so there's some humpback whales out there. Who are very large and been in that system for quite some time. And sometimes you have to dial back and realize that, okay, yes, I am just a freshman athlete, but that transition is often kind of hard when you've been, 5-star top of the game since you were the eighth grade. And now you got to go into the atmosphere. And so that can be very challenging. Oh, I'm glad you mentioned about your that sports medicine nutrition team, because I was actually scrolling through your website and I was scrolling, rolling, and still scrolling. Like they have a very robust team. Like they got everybody under the sun. And so how does your team contribute to your success? Because, not many schools have a program as from what I've seen so far, and that's very limited. This is my research. Their team is not like yours. Um, so how does it like working with a team that's such as large as that and be able to work in an atmosphere where you feel like you can work together? Because I think that understand the dynamics has to be unique with working such a robust team.
Yeah, and I actually think that's one of the ways that social workers are really primed for the role as a sports social worker within an athletic department working under the like sports medicine umbrella, because I think we do a ton of case management anyways, and that we're
Hmm.
we're sort of trained for that. And so, I personally love it. I don't know what other people's experiences are, but I really enjoy the fact that right across the hall from me is one of our nutritionists. And so if I see students that she sees, I can pop over and say, "Hey," and I think the thing that's really important, so from a confidentiality standpoint, let's just make sure we're clear about that. So
Yeah.
when students give permission, consent for treatment for us for sports psych, they also give consent for us to share medically relevant information with their athletic trainer, their team physician, and their performance nutrition person. And
Hmm.
so that feels really valuable because if I've got someone that scores mild on the scoff, which is like the disordered eating, we do a brief survey, we do, I think, 5 questions from the SCOFF. I can say, hey, so and so answered this and this on these questions just so that they're on your radar. And I literally can like walk out of my office and take 10 steps and I'm in that other person's office. And then
Hmm.
if you turn like left down the hallway, then the physician's offices are there. And then if I go kind of diagonal, then the large athletic training room is there. And so I think it's really valuable for us to be able to, and I think it's one of the ways that we provide really holistic care is because we can check in with people. I can say, hey, I would love for you to talk to your athletic trainer about this because I think it might be impacting practice on a regular basis. Hey, I just wanted to check in on so and so. We had been working on this thing about communication last week. Was she or he able to communicate with you about that? And so I think it's a really valuable we're a really valuable piece of that pie, a wheel on the car, whatever analogy that you want to use.
Hmm.
But I think it's one of the ways that we are able to provide really holistic care to students is because we're in really consistent communication and because it's a valuable I know where my expertise ends and where the nutritionist begins, and I will go to that line and then I will say like it's your thing now and I don't have expertise in that. And I also try to make sure I do that with the student athletes, right? So like, hey, this would be a great thing for you to talk to so and so about because that's their expertise, that is not my expertise. And so that's kind of where we all work together and say we know what our lines are and our limits are, and then there's like a person right across the hall that can actually be the resource for you, which I really love. And so for me, I love it. I love having access. I love being able to chit chat with people really quickly, touch base, check in to make sure that we're providing really holistic care for the students.
I'm glad those relationships exist because I know sometimes it can be very challenging to get people bought in on like, okay, I am here for this reason. I'm not here for, take over your job or anything like that. We're here to help support the athlete. And sometimes it can be pretty challenging to sell yourself in those spaces and the importance of it. And obviously you have because you have a national championship now, so it's an easy sell. But most important, like, what do you think is like? Say if you had no, I won't tell you to start back over your career or anything like that, but say for instance that, there's some teams who are interested of like diving into providing a sports social worker or maybe a team of sports medicine and nutrition team that's yours. What do you think would be some of the selling points for an athletic director? It's like, we need to go all in with providing these type of roles for our athletes.
I mean, I think it's for me, it's science based, right? So the research
Hmm.
says that nutrition helps improve performance. The research says that mental, the game is 90% mental, 10% physical, or 80-20. And so I think that there's lots of statistics out there that would provide that context and say that these things are really valuable. The other thing that I think is really important, and it goes back to one of the points we talked about earlier, is just relationships. Part of why I am able to connect and chit chat quickly with people is because I've leveraged those relationships and I've taken time on days that I don't need to talk to people about students or about things that are going on. I'm just popping in offices. I'm just checking in. I'm just asking how they're doing. I'm just, making sure that we're big advocates, from our department. We go to a sports medicine meeting once a month, and they always say like, "Hey, do you guys have anything from sports psych?" And every single time I'm always like, "Hey guys, don't forget that you have access to EAP, which is the employee assistance program.
Mm-hmm.
And it's necessary for you to take good care of yourselves because you're constantly taking care of other people." And so for us, that's really important too. So I think it's a couple of different things. So A, there's research that supports it that says that it's really valuable. B, I think that relationships are really important too. And C, I think there's evidence like the teams or the people that we work with. And I think this is where it gets difficult in our profession. So
Mm-hmm.
there are, however many students on my caseload that would likely say that we do great work together, but those are the things like because of the confidentiality standpoint, like those things aren't going to be things that are public knowledge, and they're not going to be things that are like, we're not like shouting them from the rooftops.
Mm-hmm.
But do I think that with intervention, with excellent clinical intervention, with to some degree at some point when necessary, medication intervention is important, and specific sport performance tools like that kids are performing at a higher level and they're getting better grades and they're having better relationships, like all those things happen because you have people like us employed and doing great work within departments.
That's awesome. And so thank you for selling, hopefully a position for some future sports social worker out there as well. And just thinking about even the future of sports, because you've been doing this work for quite some time and doing fairly well at the level that you're doing it right now, working on on the collegiate level. And so, for those who are, future social workers, what was some advice that you or sports social workers at that? I'm sorry. What advice would you give for future sports social workers who are looking to, get into this field, or even those who are transitioning from another role of social work?
So I think part of it is going to be education, and I think that part of that is the people that are already doing the work have to continue educating people that don't know that we do the work about the work
Hmm.
that we do. So that's my role and my responsibility. The other thing that I think is important to remember and to recognize is that for me specifically, and I would guess that lots of other people doing this work feel similar, it was really important for me to work at an outdoor wilderness camp. I got a lot of great experience and group work experience that translates to work that I do with teams now. And then I worked in community mental health where I had to diagnose and I had to do assessments. And that translates now because I do clinical work with students every week where I make diagnosis and I make recommendations because I think medication might be a helpful intervention for them. And then I was a school social worker and I had to be in on IEP meetings and 504 meetings and behavior management meetings and goal writing. And that translates now because I ask students about, do you have accommodations? Have you had an IEP? Were you ever evaluated by a school psychologist? I, was worked at an alternative school with students that had difficult behavior. Every
Hmm.
once in a while, we have some hiccups with kids that are making poor choices or that are not quite used to being able to be free and make their own decisions about what they're doing with their lives. And we have to intervene a little bit with some structure or with some accountability, and all that's relevant. And so I think I want people that are doing other jobs that are curious about sport social work. There's a lot of overlap and there's a lot of things that I do now that I did very regularly in all the other jobs that I had. And so I think it's about making sure that you're doing things well in your current environment and making sure like my clinical style has been very similar my whole career because I've always been an athlete myself and I love to be active and I'm a little competitive. And so my clinical style has stayed the same, mostly the same, I would say, with some education in, adding some things. But I think that I have been wanting to make a difference in the lives of young people for a long time. It just so happens that my expertise lies in doing that with young people who are really athletic, and I'm really thankful for that. But I don't think that there is not any one of those places that I was working before is any more important than this work that I do now. And I
Mm.
think that's the thing that's really important to keep in mind. I think people can be territorial about athletics. I think people can be territorial and like we want clout and we want it to be a big deal and we want it, I work at Indiana University and I'm like, that's fine. It's still really unbelievable to me that we won the national championship, not because we didn't deserve it or work hard, because it's like, what do you mean 16-0? And like, it's crazy. bananas. But I think part of the work that we do is humble work. It's work behind the scenes.
Mm,
It's work so that kids compete at a high level in the pool, on the field, on the court. And that's our role. And we will likely never get a lot of credit for it because that's just not the work that we do. And so I just think it's important to keep in mind that everything that you are doing before you end up in your I mean, I'm going to be 46 in a couple of weeks. I got this job when I was 39, right before I turned 40. And so I also think that I want to also manage expectations of like, I don't know that I was ready for this job right out of grad school. And I
mm.
think that there are people that are like, I want to get my dream job. I want to all these things. And like, if you can do that, I say, encourage you and say, please do that. However, don't dismiss or discourage yourself from getting other really great and relevant experience before you end up in this position because there is a high clinical load. There are some really intense things that happen to college athletes, as there are that happen with all people in the world. And then you just add athletics and it just makes it more complicated. And so I think it's just really important to A, be realistic with yourself about what you can and cannot handle, and B, use the opportunities that you're provided or that are given to you to leverage experience and knowledge that you will eventually use as a sports social worker.
Wow, that was very powerful. I definitely need to hear that this morning. Afternoon now, sorry, afternoon. Stuck in the gap there, but that is important because I do believe that all the work that we do, you take your experiences from social work and you just add it on and take it somewhere else because you say you never know you're going to use it, but more than likely you will use it before you can even think you imagine forgetting about it. So those experiences are important. And it's important. I love the fact that you talked about the importance of working in groups. Either with working with groups with different clients, or working with group of professionals. Because we get into as I'm starting to notice that a lot of people enjoy working by themselves and solo. As far from the younger individuals who are going into social work, so they're used to working by themselves. They want to work by themselves. I'm like, no, every time we ought to have a moment to work together as a team, as a group, it'll be better for you in the long run because you have to rely on somebody. Like, that's just all it is to this. My firm belief in that you're going to rely on somebody, some capacity. So it's all about how do we make sure that we work with them to achieve a goal because we don't have all the information, we don't have all the skills. We got most of them, not majority of them, but most important, like we can't do it all, and it's very important to work with a team. And thank you for sharing that so much. And so, Kelli, before we get off the episode, everybody gets asked this question. And so most people have time to think about, some of them don't. And so I would love for you to share as the episode, the show itself is called And Then We Win. So we talk about all the things that are important that build up to the win. And often it happens on and off the field. A lot of it happens off the field as a social worker. That's what we do in our role is. And so could you share what you think is critical to address before we even talk about the idea of just winning?
So the first thing that comes to mind right off the bat is just the idea that winning is the outcome goal. And we, I think, as social workers are really good at process. And so when I think about how we add value to the outcome, one of the things I think that we can do is help systems pump the brakes and focus on the process. And so thinking about like, well, yeah, we want to win the national championship. Yes, that's what most people say. Or we want to win the Big Ten championship, or we want to win the Pac. But in my question is like, that's the outcome goal. What are the processes that are put in place that are going to help us get there? And how can we as social workers support the process? And so I think that that's part of it. I think the other things to think about are, and this is like more performance based stuff, but like, what are we actually focusing on? So we're focusing on things we can't control or focusing on things we can control. So we're focusing on our controllable variables. And that's just a really great thing, whether you're an athlete or a non athlete or we call those people NARPs around these parts, non-athlete regular people. But so I think it's about, how do we leverage our strength to help support the teams that are trying to reach these goals? And how do we help them, like see blind spots if there are blind spots in the way that they're setting up the systems or in the way that they're implementing practice or the way that they're implementing certain strategy or discipline. And then the other thing I think about is just adaptability and flexibility. And so, how are we, one of the things I talk a lot about with anxiety, just generally speaking, is my brain always has these what if questions, and I want to know all the answers before I, do this thing I want to do. And so, we talk a lot about trusting our ability and being able to be adaptable. And so, you have been an athlete for 7 years and you've been in all these scenarios. And so like we're never going to be able to come up with every single scenario to sort of prepare yourself to be able to compete. But what would it be like for us to be adaptable and to be flexible and to trust the things, trust the training and trust our ability? And so when I think about, we set the outcome goal of the national championship, or we set the outcome goal of the Big Ten championship, or the Pac-12, or the even the state championship. If there are people in high school that are watching this, I think there are some back steps that have to happen. And I talk about this a lot, even from a training perspective of like, when we would do track and field, for the year, we would look at the state track meet date, and then we would set our training cycles from there. We'd start with the championship, and then we would work backwards. So it's the same thing with developing culture, with performance techniques, with developing systems that help us get there. And so we look at that and we say, yes, that's what we want, but there's got to be a really significant plan from that point until where we are now in order to get us there. And those things come with taking good care of humans, taking holistic care of humans, being healthy people ourselves if we're in the ones of positions in power, making sure that we have good communication and open communication so we can help people see their blind spots, and also celebrating success along the way. I think that's part of it too for athletes. There's a lot of, oh, I can't celebrate until I get this thing, this championship, this NCAA championship, the team title. And I think that that's valuable. And I also think there are things along the way that are really, really important to be celebrated, and really important successes to be honored. And like, let's take a deep breath and pause about this really cool thing that we did. And then tomorrow morning, like, let's get back on the horse and we're headed towards the national championship again.
Oh, I love it so much, Kelly. And what really stuck out to me is when you said that social workers, we work on the process. Everybody talks about trusting the process, but we have to develop a process first. And even though there's a lifting the weights, you're going to squat 500 pounds for reps, or, benching, whatever case may be, what is the process that leads up to that beyond, the area that you're great in? And so there are other areas where, like, okay, we say trust the process, but we have to create that process, and that's critical to the whole part of development of winning. And so, thank you so much for that, Kelly. This has been a breath of fresh air. I love being able to talk to our social workers. Love all our guests. Don't get it twisted, but I love all our guests. But definitely breath of fresh air to speak to you on this day. And hopefully more people will, play this episode, put it on repeat 3 or 4, 5, 6, 7 times, and use this as a motivational tool. So thank you so much, Kelly. And this has been another episode of And Then We Win. And thank you for tuning in to And Then We Win. My name is Dr. Justin Singleton, and I'm a sports social worker. I love what I do. And if you're interested in learning how I can best support your athlete, your parent group, or even the team, please feel free to reach out to me at info@justsinglevision.com. That is info@justsinglevision. Feel free to contact me for a free 30-minute consultation so we can figure out how we can best support the mind, vision, and action of your athletes. Thank you, and take care.